right, guys. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Andres Mejia, and today I get to preach the word. And so, as you guys have been knowing, we have been talking about faith. Great men of God who displayed great acts of faith. And today we're going to learn about one of the greatest of them all. His name is Moses. And the name Moses comes from the Hebrew word Moshe, which means to draw out. And today, I am certain you will draw out much faith from his life. The title of my sermon is No Ordinary Child. And my first point is faith in the midst of the Nile. So turn with me to Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. Exodus 1, chapter 22. And while you guys are turning there, I want to explain the context of the scripture. So what's going on in our story is the people of God, the Israelites, are living in the land of Egypt, the strongest nation in the whole wide world at this time. And in Egypt, they've been flourishing, maybe a little bit too much. They've been growing so numerous that the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt at the time, is insecure. He thinks that the Israelites may grow so much that they might even join the enemies of Egypt and overthrow the Egyptians. And so whenever there is fear, there's always hostility. And so we're going to take a look at Pharaoh's plan to wipe out the Israelites. So let's go to verse 22. It says here, then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, every boy that is born you must throw into the river, but let every girl live. Come on, ladies, that's right. This is the world that Moses was born into, a world that was hostile towards him. And he had no choice. He had no option. And, you know, the river that these boys were being thrown into is not the Christina River right here in our backyard. This is the Nile River. The Nile is the longest river in all the world. Just so you guys can get an understanding, it is 4,000 miles long. From one coast of the United States to the next coast, east to west, it's 3,000 miles. So imagine trekking all the way from east to west and adding another 1,000 miles. That's what we're talking about right here. And not only that, but the Nile River was busy. It was bustling. It was the economic center of Egypt. So you had boats aplenty. They were transporting cargo. They were transporting people. And not only that, but this water was infested with dangerous animals. I mean, you got hippopotamus, you got Nile crocodiles. I mean, this was a bad place for a baby to be thrown into. And so you can imagine the parents of Moses. For those of us who are parents, we understand how perilous of a situation this is. To be put between a rock and a hard place. Do I sacrifice my baby, or do I hold on to him and risk having our whole family executed by the Pharaoh of Egypt? But let's go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. So we're going to be flipping a lot of pages today, so no paper cuts, okay? All right. So Hebrews 11, verse 23. Yeah, the only thing getting cut is your heart. Here we go, Joe. Come on, tag team. It says here, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Moses' parents were not going to listen to the king. By faith, they were going to protect their son. And they believed that he was going to be kept safe, because he wasn't only their son. He was no ordinary child. He was a son of God. And they knew in their faith that God was going to take care of them. They knew that God was going to keep him protected. But you know what's crazy about faith and about God is faith is kind of like a bar, right? Every time you kind of reach this level of faith, God's like, okay, awesome. We're going to raise the stakes a little bit. Let's see if your faith can get up here. And you continue to get to these bars, and God continues to raise the stakes, raising your faith. And you might ask, why? The more faith you display, the more God will work through you. The more powerful your lives will be. And so we get to see Moses' parents' faith challenged to the next level. See, Moses was no ordinary child, but he still was a child, right? And so, you know, he was growing. After 3 months, he was hitting some milestones. Most babies, by the time they get to 3 to 4 months, they start babbling. You know, they start communicating. And so little Moses was starting to talk a lot. And so this was a concern for his parents. What if the Egyptians go around and they hear this little baby babbling? They might, get him, arrest the parents, and put them all to be executed. And so their faith was going to be tested once more. What are they going to do in order to protect their son? And so let's go back to Exodus chapter 2, and we're going to read verses 1 through 10. You guys with me? All right. Exodus 2, verse 1 through 10. Sorry, we're actually just going to read verses 1 through 4. Yep, sorry. So it says here, now a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Let's stop right there. Now here we see, right, Moses' parents were, you might think they're crazy, right? They're putting their son in a boat. And they're not putting him in a little kiddie pool. They're putting him in the Nile. I mean, they cannot even see to the end of this river. Not even with the strongest telescope could you even do that. I mean, they know that this water is dangerous, that the likelihood of their baby getting to safety is close to 0%. And on top of that, if the baby doesn't get crushed almost immediately, he's probably going to die of dehydration, of hunger. I mean, he's got nowhere else to poop, probably of disease too. I mean, this is not a good place for the baby to be. And so you might be thinking, this is insanity. Why would his parents do that? But they weren't insane. They were faithful. That's what they were holding on to. Turn with me to Hebrews 11, verse 1.
Let's go, Andres.
Hebrews 11, verse 1.
Come on, bro.
Hebrews 11:1 says this. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Even though Moses' parents couldn't see the end of the Nile, although they didn't know how their plan was going to turn out, they had faith. And real faith comes with certainty. They knew that their boy would be safe. They knew that no matter what, this was not an ordinary child. He was going to be protected by God, and God was going to take care of him. This is real faith. Faith takes you not looking with your eyes, but looking with your heart and mind and holding firm to the promises of God. And so let's go back to Exodus. Let's go back. That's right, Exodus chapter 2. And we're going to go ahead and read verses 5 through 10. And so it says here, then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughters, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me. I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. And so, this is pretty crazy because we see that inexplicably, Moses gets put in this little boat, and God directs the currents of the Nile right to the daughter of Pharaoh. Probably one of the most powerful women in the world. And now, if this was just any daughter of Pharaoh, this would be crazy. This would be scary because she could have the baby executed. I mean, it's a Hebrew baby. But God allowed it to be the daughter of Pharaoh that had compassion in her heart. She got this baby and she felt sorry for him. And she wanted to take care of him. And not only that, but God blesses richly the faith of Moses' parents, because not only was their son going to be taken care of by the most powerful woman on earth, probably, but also they get to take care of Moses again. Pharaoh's daughter's like, hey, I need you to take care of this Hebrew baby for me. I need you to raise him up. And so Moses gets to be taught about his God. This is a very critical moment because now his parents can teach him about the scriptures, teach him about God, teach him about the love of the Father for him. As this would be critical since he would be growing up in a society that was super wicked and that had no regard for God. And on top of that, she was getting paid for it. And so, hey, nobody pays me to take care of Zod, so that would be cool, And so we see here that God took care of every little curve of the stream, every little bit that Moses went through. He directed the course of the Nile so that he could literally have the best possible life for him, so that he could be completely taken care of. This is real faith. Faith is having confidence in what you hope for and assurance of what you cannot see. Our lives can be like the Nile. It can be dangerous. It can be really long, and we don't know, when these troubles are going to end. There's twists and turns that we don't foresee coming in our lives. But what's crazy is we have to remember that just like Moses, we're no ordinary children. We're children of God. God is deeply invested in every single one of us. And even though we don't see the end of our troubles, we don't see the end of our hardships, we know that God does. And we have to trust that he will direct the currents of our lives to literally the perfect places, to have the perfect outcome. I want to share a quote by Samwise Gamgee. You guys know who that is, right? Oh, come on, guys. What? He's a character from Lord of the Rings. Only like the second best book ever, besides the Bible. Okay, it's all right. It's all right. Well, it's a quote about life and about the hardships of life. So here we go. It says, I know it's all wrong. He's talking to Frodo, by the way, his best friend. He says, by rights, we shouldn't even be here, but we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered, full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it will shine out the clear. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I now know. I know now. Folks in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. And Sam's right. These people were holding on to something, and that was faith. Moses' mother had to hold on to that faith. When we're in life's trials and our Niles, we have to hold on to that faith and not turn back, because faith in God is always richly rewarded. He will get us out the other side. But not only that, God uses the hardships of our lives to inspire other people. Yeah. These are the stories of our lives that really matters. If your life was perfectly the way you wanted, that would not inspire anybody. It's how you deal with your hardship, where you place your faith, that can really inspire the multitudes. Have faith in God and stay the course. Amen. Point number 2 is faith in the riches of God. Let's go, babe. So here, we got Moses growing up as a prince of Egypt. We're going to see how awesome that life was. Let's go to Acts chapter 7, and let's read verses 20 through 22.
Come on, Grace. Come on.
Acts 7, verse 20 to 22. So it says here, and to recap a little bit, it says, at that time Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months he was cared for in his father's house. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. Moses was brought up as a prince of Egypt. Egypt, like I said before, was the superpower of the world. He had access to the greatest education, the greatest technology, the greatest pleasures, anything a man or woman could ever want. Some historians even claim that he was next in line to be heir to the throne, to be Pharaoh, the next king of the mightiest country on the earth. I mean, who would ever turn that down? You literally get everything you have ever wanted. Well, let's go to Hebrews 11, and let's read 24 through 27. Come on. Hebrews 11, verse 24 through 27.
Come on.
So it says here, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible, him who is God. Moses was a Hebrew, and he saw how his people were being mistreated. He saw how the people of God were being mistreated. And although he had all the things he could ever want, the one thing he didn't have, if he continued to live in that lifestyle, was the approval of God, the one thing that matters. And by faith, Moses gave up all the privileges of being a son of Egypt, of having everything he wanted. Instead, he chose to join in the disgrace of being related with his people, being with the Hebrews, the people of God. And so we need to have faith that it is better to give up the treasures of this world, be it a really incredible, lucrative career that compromises our walk with God, or a relationship with an amazing boy or girl that compromises our walk with God, or even any vice. It doesn't matter how much pleasure it brings you. It doesn't matter how much acclaim it brings you. It does not bring you God. And it's not worth it. And so we, like Moses, need to have faith to choose the better of the two, which is to choose a relationship with God. But choosing a relationship with God is awesome, but sometimes it leads us down a path that's not so, it lacks luster, right? It's not as pretty. Maybe it's not as fun. It doesn't put as much money in our bank account, And so sometimes it can be hard to kind of deal with that. And so we want to see Moses' next step of his life. Let's go to Acts 7, 23 through 29. Acts 7, 23 through 29. It says here, when Moses was 40 years old, and we're going to also see how, why he left Egypt. It says, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. The next day, Moses came upon two Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other?" But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. And then after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush near Mount Sinai. Now let's hop quickly to Exodus chapter 3, verse 1.
All right.
And I'll just read the first part of that verse. It says here, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian." We'll keep it right there. And so after murdering this Egyptian in defense of his people, Moses fled to the land of Midian. He gave up all the wealth that he had in Egypt. He went from pretty much going to living in New York City, being the king of New York, to going to Odessa here in Delaware. And most of you guys don't even know where that's at, right? It's a tiny little hole in the ground place. But he went there to live the life that God called him to live. And it wasn't very spectacular. It wasn't very flamboyant. It was to be a shepherd of sheep for 40 years. And yet he had to have faith that there was more value following God's plan for his life, even if it meant a lowly career as a shepherd, than being a prince of Egypt in sin. And so, for me, when I left behind my life of sin and I became a Christian, I wanted to do what I felt mattered most, and that's to help others become Christians too. And so I dreamed of the full-time ministry. I was like, man, God, that's what I want. I want to dedicate my life to that. And so when I was in Miami in the fall of 2020, I was being trained to go into the full-time ministry. And I was asked, hey, bro, so you can have more time to be on campus to do Bible studies, why don't you get a job at Starbucks? And I'm like, okay, sure. Why not? Let me do it.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll tell you what, sometimes I was there and I'm like, what the heck am I doing? I have a degree. I'm 5-6 years older than these kids. I got milk all over me. I'm waking up super early. I don't know what I'm doing. And, I have to probably wonder, I think Moses felt the same way. He probably had his doubts when he was in those 40 years in the wilderness taking care of these sheep. Probably thinking, man, when I was in Egypt, I could have cold water whenever I wanted. I had those guys fanning me with those leaves. Now I have to take care of these sheep. There's dung everywhere. It's hot. No one knows me here. What am I doing? What was the point of it all? It was probably something he asked. But let's go back to Acts 7, and let's read verses 30 through 36. Let's see what God was doing in the wilderness all that time with Moses. Acts 7, verse 30 through 36.
Come on.
It says here, after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. As he went over to look more closely, he heard the Lord's voice. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, take off your sandals. The place where you are standing is holy ground. I have indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their groaning and have come down to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt. This is the same Moses whom they had rejected with the words, who made you ruler and judge. He was sent to be the ruler and deliverer by God himself through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. He led them out of Egypt and did wonders and miraculous signs in Egypt at the Red Sea and for 40 years in the desert. This is the Moses who told the Israelites, God will send you a prophet like me from your own people. You know, I believe that God wanted to teach Moses a couple of things while he was in the desert for 40 years. See, God had plans for him from the very beginning. He said, okay, this guy chose me. He rejected the riches of this world. I'm going to make him a powerful man of God. He's going to be a ruler of my people. But you know what? I think Moses had to learn two things while he was out here. He had to learn, one, how to be a shepherd. You know, to be a shepherd requires a special heart. You know, Moses had to take care of these sheep one by one. He had to wash them when their wool got dirty. He had to tend to their injuries when they got hurt. He had to help them when they were being dumb. You know, these were all things that he was going to have to apply when he was leading God's people. You know, because when he led the Israelites, he was leading 2 million souls. You got to have a big heart. But also that, he had to learn humility. You know, this is a guy that had everything at his grips. You know, for 40 years, he was a prince of Egypt. And how do you humble a prince of Egypt? You make him a shepherd in the wilderness for 40 years. That's what you got to do. And what's awesome is later in the scriptures, it's recorded that Moses was the most humble man on earth. You need to be taught humility, and you need to let God teach that for you. And so what's awesome is after Moses gets his time of humility in the wilderness, and by choosing God and not the riches of this world, God uses him to lead his people out of Egypt. God uses him to perform signs and wonders that have never been seen before. You know, that he parted the Red Seas, and he continues to be an inspiration today. What's awesome is that princes of Egypt, no one remembers them. You know, I'm a history buff. I know a lot about history, and I can only name 2 pharaohs. That's it. But what's awesome is everyone remembers Moses. Yeah. You know, when you focus on the wealth of this world, your impact is minimal. You're just another rich guy in the hills. That's all it is. But when you focus on the riches of God, your impact echoes throughout eternity. Wow. You know, this is the life that God wants for you. You know, like Moses, I remember I was at a similar crossroads when I was a younger man. You know, I was at Starbucks, you know, kind of wondering what the heck am I doing here? And it was crazy because I just got a job at the University of Miami, which was my second dream job at that time, you know, and I was so excited. And one of the opportunities that they gave me was I could get whatever master's degree I wanted for free. And so I'm like, whoa, this is like the best school in Florida. All right, that's a little trigger for my Gators out here. Yeah, okay, all right. It is the best. But anyway, so I was able to get a master's degree from UM for free, but at the same time, I was being offered by our church to get my undergrad in ministry at the International College of Christian Ministry, the ICCM. And so I was like, man, what do I do? What do I do? I know if I choose my master's degree at UM, I'm going to make way more money. You know, that's kind of cool. But I also know that if I choose to get a degree in ministry, I can make the most impact. Although I may never actually get a job working full-time for the church. There is that risk. And so I was thinking what to do. And so anyway, I'm at Starbucks, and I usually work the espresso bar, the cold bar, or the drive-thru. But this one time, I was at the cashier, or the cash register. And so I'm there, and this portly, kind of balding, middle-aged guy comes up, you know, and he starts small-talking with me. He's like, hey, do you go to school? And I'm like, funny that you asked that. I'm actually at a crossroads. I might either get my undergrad in ministry or I might get a master's in public relations from the University of Miami. And he just kind of looked at me. And then he hands me a business card and he told me he was the CEO of the biggest public relations firm in Miami. And that once I got accepted into UM, to give him a call and he'd give me a job. And so I just remember thinking like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, I'm literally promised a job in a field that I'm interested in while I'm working to get my master's degree. And so, I thought about it, prayed about it, sought advice. And, after much prayer and thinking, I made my decision that I was going to go to school for ministry. And what's crazy is that even to this day, I'm not paid. I just graduated from my school, from school in ministry, and I'm not paid. I may never get paid to do what I do. But what's awesome is the impact that I'm able to have far surpasses any amount of money that I could have made being a public relations agent or whatever. And so, and the cool thing is I get to do that alongside you guys as well. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27 through 28. Because I'll tell you what, choosing ministry over, I guess, public relations or whatever, a master's degree from UM, it did bring a lot of kind of scorn and criticism from my family, from friends. They were like, what are you doing? Like, you're losing guaranteed money. Like, why would you choose something like that? But here in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27 through 28. Yeah, 27 through 28. It says here, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are. God's riches may not look like much in the eyes of the world. In fact, it might not look like anything. And when you choose to adopt those riches, go after those riches in faith, you might not look like anything in the eyes of the world either. But the truth is these riches lead to eternal life and they lead to eternal impact. So although in the eyes of the world you may be the scum of the earth, in God's eyes, you're more than a child. Or you're not an ordinary child, you're a child of God. You're the manna from heaven. And so we got to have faith to choose the riches of God. Point number 3 is to have faith in your family. One thing I've been doing is I've been sharing my faith at the University of Delaware, the campus. And one of the things that I hear a lot about from people when I invite them to come out to church or to a Bible discussion is they're hurt a lot by their experiences in church. There's a lot of church hurt going on. And, I can relate. I know that I've been both a source of church hurt and I've received church hurt as well. And Moses can relate as well. So let's go to Numbers 14. And let's read verses 1 through 20. Numbers 14. It says here, I'll give you guys a second, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. Numbers 14, 1 through 20.
Come on, bro. You're doing awesome.
Okay, it says here, and also just to provide context while we're flipping over there. So the people of Israel, right, they're about to get into the promised land, the land that God has been promising them since the time of Abraham. And so they're excited, but also a little faithless. So they go ahead and send out some spies to see if the land really is as good as God says it is. And so what happens is you get 2 different reports, a faithful report and a faithless report. The faithful report, there's 2 guys saying, man, this land is awesome. There's so many resources. And yeah, there's some giants, but we can take them with God. Yeah. But then the fearless report, which is given by 10 of the spies, they're just saying, man, these giants are big. We can't take them. It's not worth it. And they start spreading that report among the camp of the Israelites. The crazy thing about faith and fear is they're both highly contagious. And so the fear starts spreading in the camp. So let's read. It says, that night, all the people of the community raised their voices and wept out loud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this desert. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joseph, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they." Moses said to the Lord, "Then the Egyptians will hear about it. By your power you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land about it. They have already heard that you, O Lord, are with these people, and that you, O Lord, have been seen face to face, that your cloud stays over them, and that you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If you put these people to death all at one time, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, 'The Lord was not able to bring these people into the land he promised them on oath, so he slaughtered them in the desert.' Now may the Lord's strength be displayed just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generations. In accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now." The Lord replied, "I have forgiven them as you asked." And so right here, we have a tough moment. I believe at this moment, Moses is probably experiencing a little church hurt. The people that he has so valiantly, bravely led over the years is now full of fear, faithless, and now opposing him. They're saying, "Hey, we want a new leader. On top of that, let's stone this guy." And so if I were Moses, I'd probably be tempted to feel bitter, tempted to just leave the Israelites. God gave him an offer that I didn't think he could refuse. He said, "I'll make you into a greater nation." And if Moses did any of that, he would have been totally justified. Why not? But we see that Moses is indeed the most humble man on earth. And the first thing he does is he falls flat on his face and he prays. And I think at this moment he's praying for his own heart, but he's praying for the people of God, because he knows that they're no ordinary children. This is the children of God. And he has faith that although at this moment they're faithless, they're fearful, and they want to kill me, I know what they're going to become. They're going to become a powerful nation. I believe in them. I'm going to pray for them. And I'm going to battle for them to be the man or the people that they need to be. And so, I know for me, like I mentioned before, I've been hurt and I've caused hurt in the church. And, I remember when I was in Miami, I was a young Christian, a young disciple, and I had a lot of sin in my life. And I remember the guy that was discipling me, mentoring me at the time, he was awesome, like super talented, good looking, super funny, a great singer, just everything that I wanted. I'm like, man, this guy's so much better than me. And I was filled with so much envy. To the point where I hated him. I hated this guy. Even as a Christian, I felt these things. And so it resulted in me being rebellious. He would give direction for the campus ministry, and I'm like, I'm just not going to listen to this guy. He's not old enough to lead me. I disrespected him in front of people. And it even got so bad that there was a hurricane coming towards South Florida, and I was hoping that it would cause damage to him and his house. And what was crazy was I remember being filled with a lot of guilt, a lot of shame for my actions, my beliefs, my thoughts. And I confronted the brother and just told him how I was feeling. And he was hurt. I remember he was crying. He couldn't believe it. I was his right-hand guy. And this is how I felt about him. But his response was so awesome. He just said, "Let's pray." And we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed. And I just remember he never gave up on me. He had faith in who I really was. Not who I was in that moment, but who I was meant to be. A child of God. Someone who could be utilized powerfully to do great things. This brother could have let the church hurt get to him and to have distanced himself from God, distanced himself from me, abandoned me to my own devices. But he pulled me in. He loved me and he prayed. And what's awesome is because of his faithfulness, he's out there leading a church. He's about to be sent on a mission team to lead another church.
Wow.
And, God has allowed for me as well to do powerful things in Miami and in Delaware. But I wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for this brother's faith, if it wasn't for him enduring, my scorn, my shame. And so the truth is, as long as you and I are both in the church, we're going to get hurt. It's because you and I are in the church. We're imperfect. We're sinful. We're going to hurt each other. But when we are inevitably hurt by one another, we have to imitate the faith of Moses. We need to get on our face and we need to pray. We need to pray for our own hearts to be soft. But we also have to pray for the people that have hurt us, to pray that God will give us the faith to believe not in who they are, but who they're going to be. Incredible men and women of God. Because that's who we are. And so, in conclusion, we got to remember that we're not ordinary children. We're just like Moses. We're children of God. And just like Moses, God is going to take care of you when you're in the Niles of your life. When you're going through life's difficulties, life's challenges, have faith in him. Have faith that he loves you and he will guide the currents of your life. Have faith that abandoning worldly pleasures will lead you to God's riches and that you will be used powerfully by him. And lastly, have faith that God will transform your brothers and sisters even when they hurt you. And to God be all the glory.